Andrew stopped in the middle of the brightly lit fundraiser. People were laughing, clinking glasses, taking photos. But he stood still, like someone had just called his name from across the crowd. His eyes were locked on the woman talking with a group of donors near the stage. A pale dress, calm presence, and a smile I recognized right away. Evelyn. Andrew tilted his head toward me, his voice low and strange enough that I turned to look at him. You know her? Senator Hale's wife? I kept my gaze steady. We lived together for 3 years. The words dropped between us like a cold pause. Not shame, not confusion, just a fact, said without softening or excuse. Andrew looked at me longer than usual, like he was mentally checking everything he thought he knew about me. But I didn't add anything. No need. I just watched Evelyn from across the room. Her hair was pinned up neatly, her shoulders held straight like someone was always watching. She looked fine, too fine, and because of that, she didn't look like the Evelyn I used to know. To understand why Andrew was that shocked, I need to go back to when everything was simpler. When I was just a law student living on scholarships and part-time jobs. When I didn't yet have to keep a calm face in front of politics and empty handshakes. My name is Mara Sutton. Back then, I was a legal assistant at a small office near campus, spending most of my time typing documents, reading case files, and trying to keep my head clear. I was quiet, meticulous, and often teased by friends for living off to-do lists. Maybe that's why housing paired me with Evelyn, someone who needed a roommate who wasn't loud and respected personal space. Evelyn walked into the room on the first day with a big suitcase and the sharp look of someone who grew up inside her family's expectations. She was an ambitious law student, smart in a way that made people both admire her and stay cautious. When she introduced herself, I only remembered one thing. Her voice was calm, not trying to impress anyone. But I could see that behind that calmness was pressure shaped into habit. We were different in a lot of ways, but aligned in the ones that mattered most. We were both under pressure from the program. We were both the type to stay up until 3 a.m. taking notes and then wake up at 7 to make it to a mandatory class. Evelyn always looked fine, always knew how to hide the exhaustion, but living with her long enough, I learned there were nights when she didn't say a word. She'd just sit by the window, looking out, breathing quietly. Big exams usually turned our room into a battlefield of papers. Me with my stack of files, Evelyn with her thick case books. Some nights we sat on the floor, splitting a cheap cup of noodles and sharing the small stories only people who lived together would understand. I once asked her if she ever wanted to skip a day. Evelyn gave a tired but sharp smile. If I take one day off, my parents will think I failed a whole year. It sounded like a joke, but there was nothing funny about it. She was always being watched, not in the literal sense, more like the invisible kind of surveillance powerful families put on their children. Don't slip, don't slow down, don't turn off the path. I'd seen her take calls from her mother. Steady voice, short sentences, no encouragement, just reminders to maintain her standing. Every time it happened, Evelyn went a little quieter. But Evelyn wasn't weak. She was smart, steady, and able to handle almost anything. And because of that, the moments where she showed even a trace of exhaustion only made it clearer how heavy the pressure on her really was. One night, after a class that ran late, we were packing up our books. The room was dim except for the small desk lamp. Evelyn set her pen down, stared into nothing for a long moment, then said softly, "Mara, I'm scared my future won't be something I get to choose." It wasn't complaining. It wasn't crying. It was just a truth slipping out because the room was too quiet. That line didn't show weakness. It showed awareness. And that awareness was sharp enough to make me stop what I was doing. I asked her if she wanted to choose a different path. Evelyn smiled. A smile I'll never forget, beautiful but sad, in the way someone looks when they know they've been placed in a life they didn't build themselves. I don't know, she said. I just know everyone already expects something from me. I didn't answer, because I knew some things no one could choose for her, but there were also things she couldn't escape unless she was willing to break the entire system around her. I didn't expect that one line, something that sounded like nothing more than a tired night in college, would become the seed for everything that happened later. When I saw Evelyn again at the fundraiser tonight, her smile was still perfect, still in place, still the smile of a senator's wife. But her eyes weren't the eyes of the person who once told me she was afraid her future wouldn't be her own choice. No, those eyes said something else entirely. She was trying to hold on to a part of herself so it wouldn't disappear, and the moment I saw her from across the room, I knew something was wrong, not because she'd grown weaker, but because she was too quiet. I still felt that strange tightness in my chest when the fundraiser ended. Andrew and I walked out to the parking lot, the yellow lights hitting the damp concrete. He stayed quiet the whole way to the car, but I knew it wasn't because he was upset. Andrew wasn't the type to get jealous about the past. He only got cautious when something involved politics, a world he always saw as full of shadows. When we got in the car, he finally asked, his voice low and controlled, 3 years living together, how close were you? I didn't turn to him. I just looked straight through the windshield, close enough for me to know she's stronger than people think. Andrew tapped his fingers lightly on the steering wheel. I just need to know one thing. Does this affect us in any way? I answered evenly, no. And if anything does, it'll come from someone else, not me. He nodded, but I could still see the layer of calculation in his eyes. Not suspicion toward me, more like he was weighing whether Evelyn's reappearance in our lives carried risks he hadn't accounted for. Politics wasn't something he wanted to touch, and I didn't blame him for feeling that way. But after that night, Evelyn started appearing in front of me more than I wanted, not in person, through the media, events, and political news I normally skim past in seconds. Every time I saw her, I noticed the same thing. Evelyn always walked half a step behind Senator Hale, not farther, not closer, like she'd been taught to maintain that exact distance. In a short interview, the host asked her about the role of the woman behind a powerful man. Evelyn smiled, a beautiful, flawless smile, but so drained that I had to stop for a moment. I only support what's appropriate, she said. It sounded perfectly scripted, not a single word out of place. It wasn't her voice. It wasn't the voice of the person who once argued with me until 3 a.m. just to defend a tiny clause she believed was right. I shut the screen off, but that image stayed with me. A few weeks later, I saw Evelyn at a community event. Not a big fundraiser, just a program offering free legal help for low-income families. Senator Hale had been invited to speak, and Evelyn came with him, like always. I was at the intake table, checking paperwork for a young family. Andrew was in a meeting nearby and would pick me up later. Evelyn walked past, holding a thin stack of documents. She didn't see me, but I saw the urgency in every one of her movements. When a volunteer called her name to ask for a signature, Evelyn turned back too quickly, and the papers slipped from her hands. They scattered open on the floor. The first page showed legal support for abused children, proposal for improving early identification procedures. I froze, and just as Evelyn bent down to gather the papers, a man from the senator's team walked over. His face was cold as steel. You don't need to worry about this kind of thing, he said, loud enough for a few people nearby to hear. A politician's wife just needs to stand in the right place. The words were sharp and clean, like a knife slicing through the air. A few people looked over, then turned away just as quickly, as if they were used to hearing things like that in this environment. Evelyn didn't react, no pushback, no argument. She just straightened up and picked up the last page. Her hand gripped the edge of the document so tightly I could see every knuckle turn pale. I didn't walk over. I didn't step in. I just watched, the way someone who's known Evelyn long enough can read what she doesn't say. After the aide walked off, Evelyn quietly aligned the papers, turning her back to everyone for a few seconds, like she needed to catch her breath. Then she lifted her head, and that familiar smile returned. The practiced, proper smile she'd trained herself to wear like a reflex. But this time, for a split second, I caught something in her eyes. Not weakness, not collapse. A quiet struggle from someone who knows she's been placed in the wrong role for far too long. On the way home, I didn't tell Andrew what I'd seen. But the image kept replaying in my head. Evelyn being spoken to like she was just another piece of campaign decor. And her silence. Not because she was weak, but because silence had become her survival strategy. I started to wonder, was the power people thought she had actually hers? Or was it just a big stage, with her standing under the lights but never holding the mic? The thought was cold, concise, and clear. Not pity, not soft sympathy. Just the realization that Evelyn was trapped in a role she didn't choose. And what bothered me most was this. I had the feeling she'd known it for a long time, but couldn't see a way out. That evening, when people started leaving, I walked to the parking lot to wait for Andrew. The air was cool. Rows of cars stretched out, each one reflecting the white lights overhead. I texted Andrew to tell him I was waiting near the entrance when I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't have time to turn around before a familiar voice spoke, quiet but steady. Mara. I turned around. Evelyn stood a few steps away. No polished smile, no performance. Just her real face, still, but holding on to something like a piece of courage she didn't want to lose. I need to talk to you, she said. I stayed quiet, waiting for the rest. Evelyn exhaled softly. It's not about the past. She looked straight at me, her eyes steady. It's about something I can't do alone. The sentence ended there, clean, cold, and heavy enough for me to understand that everything I'd seen before was only the surface. The rest was waiting for me in what came next. Evelyn chose a quiet place to meet that night. Not fancy, not crowded, just warm yellow lights and the low murmur of distant conversations. She arrived before I did, sitting upright, her hands clasped together. Nothing about her looked like a political spouse maintaining an image. It was just Evelyn, the version I knew when we lived together, but more tired, more weighted, and sharper in the way someone becomes after being forced into silence for too long. When I sat down, she started right away, no circling around. Mara, I'm trying to push a bill for legal support for vulnerable communities, especially minors who've been abused. She spoke slowly, her voice steady, but I could hear what she was holding back underneath. Those kids, if no one steps in, they disappear from the system. No follow-up, no protection. I nodded slightly. You want to push that bill forward. Evelyn looked down at her cup of tea. I do, but my husband's team doesn't. They say it's not beneficial. I didn't ask what kind of beneficial they meant. I already knew. In politics, some things are right, but not worth fighting for because they don't build reputation, don't create a good photo op, and don't buy support. What do you want me to do? I asked. She lifted her head. Her eyes were calm in a way that felt unusual. Mara, I need you. She paused for half a beat. I don't have anyone else I can trust enough. That line wasn't nostalgia for an old friendship. It was a fact. And I understood why. I was the only person she'd ever worked with back when we were both at the starting line. No power, no roles to play, no attached interests. And I was the only person in her current orbit who wasn't part of the political machine. Evelyn gave me a brief rundown of the bill, how she'd gathered data, reached out to support centers, studied the procedures. She'd done everything alone, quietly, like she was hiding a secret, only to be told by the advisory team that this wasn't a campaign priority. When they said that, I wanted to stand up and tell them some things can't be measured by benefit. She let out a small laugh, the kind that had lost all its warmth. But I know if I did that, they'd shut me out of everything. I asked, and you want to keep going, even without the team's support? Evelyn nodded without hesitation. I want to do this, not for image, because I know exactly who those kids need. There was a rare kind of resolve in her voice, not loud, not staged. Just the weight of someone who knows a right thing needs to happen, even when no one else wants it to. When I told Andrew about it, he stayed quiet for a moment. I could tell he was processing it, the same way he always did when something didn't fit the logic of his work. You're telling me a senator's wife needs help from you? You? A regular legal assistant? I didn't like the way he said regular, even though he didn't mean it as an insult. I said sharp but not loud, because power doesn't always mean freedom. Andrew exhaled and leaned back in his seat. I don't want you getting pulled into this. You know how messy politics is. I'm not being pulled in, I said. I'm choosing. He didn't respond, but I could see the caution in his eyes, not toward Evelyn, but toward everything standing behind her. A few days later, Evelyn invited me to a small internal meeting with the senator's team under the label of volunteer legal consulting. I showed up with cautious observation. It was the first time I saw how they treated Evelyn when there were no cameras, no audience. She presented an idea about improving how minors' testimonies are recorded in abuse cases. A small adjustment, but one that could make a big difference. I could see how prepared she was. Every sentence clear, every data point placed exactly where it needed to be. But as soon as she finished, an older advisor shook his head. Evelyn, your role is image, not legislation. The line slid across the room, cold enough to make the air feel tight. No one reacted. The whole room treated it as normal. I looked at Evelyn. She didn't argue. But her eyes flicked to me for a brief moment, so quick that if I hadn't lived with her before, I might have missed it. It said, see, this is what I deal with every day. I understood. It wasn't that Evelyn lacked ability. It wasn't that she couldn't contribute. It was simply that, in their eyes, she was born to stand beside power, not ever touch it. When the meeting ended, Andrew came to pick me up. He saw my face and asked right away, "Are you okay?" I said, "You judge people by their titles. I judge them by how they're treated." The line made a few people in the room turn their heads. Even Andrew stopped in place. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't attack anyone. I was just direct and honest. No one replied. They didn't need to. Andrew looked at me for a few seconds, tilting his head slightly, like he was seeing a side of me he hadn't fully noticed before. When I stepped into the long hallway, Evelyn was leaning lightly against the wall, as if she'd been waiting for me. She didn't say anything to introduce the moment. She didn't explain what had just happened. "I'm going to push that bill," she said. "Not through the team, on my own." She paused, looking at me with calm, deliberate resolve. "Mara, I still need you, if you'll say yes." And that was the moment I knew this story was about to turn in a different direction. One neither of us would have a path laid out for, just the one we'd have to walk ourselves. From the day Evelyn decided to push the bill on her own, our schedule changed completely. No big meetings, no official sessions, no emails that could be monitored. Just quiet nights in a small room behind a public library where no one paid attention to two women bent over stacks of documents. I helped Evelyn go through each clause line by line, from verifying signs of abuse to coordinating between support centers and legal agencies. She asked a lot, took notes nonstop, and listened in a way I'd never seen from her back in school. Not because she didn't know enough, but because this time she wanted to do it right, not make it look good. We collected real case files from small organizations, the kind with only a few staff members, but more than a dozen cases each month. I interviewed social workers, and Evelyn quietly took notes, asking sharp questions that never intimidated anyone. This was the Evelyn from law school, smart, direct, and driven. Only now she knew that every question she asked could change someone's life. Everything we did was kept quiet. No photos, no posts, no media. Evelyn put it simply, I can't let them turn this into PR. And she was right. For the first time, she wasn't the senator's wife. She was Evelyn, someone reclaiming the reason she chose law in the first place. After a few weeks, I started to see a subtle shift in her. Not the kind of strength that comes from holding power. The kind that appears when someone finally finds their own voice again. One night, while we were reviewing data, she stared at a page for a long time and said softly, Do you remember law school? I used to want to protect people who had no one. Then I forgot. I looked at her. I didn't comfort her. I didn't explain anything. You didn't forget, I said. You were forced to set it aside. She gave a small smile, not sad, but touching something old between us. I noticed her sitting straighter, her voice steadier. When she talked about the bill now, it was her real voice. No longer the version edited and softened by an advisory team. Andrew had been watching everything more quietly than I expected. One evening, when I walked into the house, he was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea in his hand, looking thoughtful. I've been observing, he said, and maybe I misunderstood. I sat down. Misunderstood what? I thought you were being dragged into some messy political stuff. But then I saw the way you work, and the way she tries. None of it looks political at all. I stayed quiet, waiting for the rest. Andrew exhaled softly, his voice gentler than usual. I think you're helping someone find themselves again, and that's worth more than any of my worries. Andrew's change wasn't loud, but it was enough for me to see that he'd begun to see Evelyn through a different lens. Not as a woman standing beside power, but as someone fighting for the right to do what's right. On the day Evelyn presented the bill to a group of independent legal experts, the room went completely silent. No cameras, no press. Just a few people who understood the system and were willing to listen if someone had the courage to step forward. Evelyn didn't shake. She walked to the center of the room, set her documents on the table, and looked at each person as if she had finally stepped into the place she was meant to stand. Her voice was calm but firm. You might see this as a small proposal. But to me, and to the kids I've met, it's survival. People exchanged looks. No one expected a sharp presentation from a senator's wife. They were waiting for something polite and superficial. But Evelyn didn't offer a single line like that. She broke down each issue clearly, placed the data exactly where it belonged, and explained everything with the perspective of someone who studied law, not someone standing behind a political stage. I saw a few surprised faces. One expert looked at her with a reevaluating expression. Another started taking notes faster. At the back of the room, Senator Hale stood still. He didn't step in, didn't correct her, didn't interfere. He looked at Evelyn as if he were seeing her for the first time, not as a role, but as a woman with a mind of her own. When Evelyn finished, the room stayed quiet for a few seconds before someone clapped, slow but genuine. The others followed. It wasn't polite applause. It was acknowledgement. Evelyn bowed her head slightly, but her eyes went to me. Not pride, not triumph. Just the look of someone who had crossed an important line. After the presentation, as we walked out of the building, a group of media showed up at the exit. No one on the team had warned us. They rushed toward Evelyn like they just caught the scent of an opportunity. One of them called out loudly, Evelyn, did you push this bill on your own to prove something? Are you breaking away from your husband's team? Another jumped in. Is this a move to boost your personal image? The questions were sharp, rapid, and painfully typical of the way the media tries to turn everything into a political fight. Evelyn didn't step back. She stood straight, looking at them with such calm that they actually went quiet for a moment. No, she said, her voice cool but not confrontational. I'm not doing this to be seen. She paused, a silence long enough for people to brace themselves for whatever she would say next. I'm doing this because I owe it to the child I used to be. The entire media group froze for a brief moment. No one expected that. It wasn't dramatic in the way they wanted, but it was real, so real they couldn't twist it into something negative. I stood beside her, watching Evelyn walk past them like she'd just reclaimed a part of herself she'd lost for years. The news that the bill had been approved to move forward came on a quiet afternoon. I was cleaning up my desk when my phone buzzed. Just a short message from Evelyn. It's through. No exclamation mark, no extra words. But I knew instantly. It wasn't a big victory, not some milestone that makes people cheer. It was just one step. But in politics, sometimes one step is enough for someone to finally breathe after years of being kept in place. That night, the media reported briefly that the proposal by Senator Hale's wife had been accepted for deeper review. They still called her that, out of habit. But this time, when I saw her face on the screen, I didn't see that old loneliness in her eyes anymore. Evelyn was standing exactly where she chose to stand, not where she was told to. A few days later, I saw Evelyn again at a small event. Not a political meeting, just a community program she and her husband were attending. When they walked in, I noticed the first thing immediately. She wasn't walking behind him anymore. She walked beside him, shoulder to shoulder, her step steady, her posture straight but not tense, as if she no longer had to match anyone's rhythm but her own. People took photos. People came up to greet them. Evelyn responded politely, but she didn't look to her husband to see how he wanted her to answer, a habit I had seen far too clearly before. Senator Hale watched her longer than usual. His eyes were no longer evaluating or adjusting her image. They showed respect. Respect in the way someone finally realizes the woman beside him is more than the role he once thought she played. No one said it. No one needed to. But I saw the shift clearly. That night, when Andrew and I got home, he walked into the living room first, then turned back to me with a look I hadn't seen before. Not tense, not cautious. More like he'd just put together the final piece of a picture he'd misunderstood from the start. I've been thinking, Andrew said, resting his hand on the back of a chair, and there's something I should have said earlier. I waited. You help someone find their voice again. That's something I didn't see at first. His voice wasn't raised. He wasn't trying to sound wise. It was just recognition, clear, precise, direct, the way I've always handled things myself. I nodded slightly. Not everyone gets the chance to stop and actually hear themselves. Andrew stepped closer and took my hand. And not everyone has someone clear-headed enough to remind them they still have a voice. That line wasn't a compliment. It was simply the truth. And I accepted it the same way I accepted Evelyn's journey, without sentimentality, without decoration. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn got busier, but she didn't disappear. Every so often, she sent me a short update, a few revisions, a few new meetings, a few slow but real steps forward. One afternoon, she called me out to meet. We sat on the steps of a quiet building where the late day sun lit up each stone. Evelyn looked calm, truly calm, something I hadn't seen so clearly since the day we reconnected. I've been thinking a lot about the past, she said. I know. She gave a small smile, then looked up at the pale gray sky. A connection from the past. It's not meant to pull us backward, you know that. I stayed quiet, letting her continue. Sometimes it opens the path for us to stand up at the moment we need it most. I didn't need to ask whether she was talking about me or herself, because that line was true for both of us. When we stood up to leave, Evelyn turned to me. No showy gratitude. No long, polished thank you meant to maintain an image. Just Evelyn, the clearest version of her. I looked at her. This time, you chose your own path. I paused for a beat. And you chose right. The line wasn't encouragement. It wasn't motivation. It was acknowledgement. The way we used to talk to each other years ago. Direct, cool, but warm where it mattered. Evelyn smiled. A strong smile, but calm. Not the smile of a senator's wife. Not the smile of someone being monitored. But the smile of Evelyn, the woman who stepped out of the role and reclaimed the part of herself she'd lost. I watched her as she walked out of the courtyard, her stride confident, not fast or slow, not matching anyone else's rhythm, only her own. And right then, I understood. This story wasn't about power, politics, or cold confrontations. It was about someone returning to the place they were pushed away from, and about the moment they stood up straight again by their own strength. Some connections don't come back to remind us of the past. They come back to open a new door in the present. Sometimes, all it takes is one person seeing us at the right moment for us to stop and finally hear our own voice. This is where the story ends. Thank you for listening until the end. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. Your support means more than you know.